What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Hogmolly Hustle. Before we get started, if you like what you hear when you stumble across us, make sure you like and subscribe, share us with all your friends, leave a comment below. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff here, recap last week, preview next week, talk about some big news, and there was a lot of big news. But we also have a special guest, Mr. Ryan Keller, former host of the Fantasy and Chill podcast, is going to be here to talk about some fantasy with us and probably some other things too. So, Ryan, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Ryan Keller, just like you said. Avid fantasy football player, been so for a while, but also sports enthusiast, so I can kind of chime in wherever you need me to. But I will let you take it away from here.
All right. And we are a football podcast primarily, but there is kind of a big sporting event that went down recently. Austin, you want me to tell everybody about that?
I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about, Caleb?
Sorry, like a Major League Bowling championship or something?
Oh, that was last weekend, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, Braves won the World Series. So, yeah, excited. I was down there for Game 4 at Truist Park. Place was rocking. The first 5 innings were less than ideal, and then Dansby Swanson and Jorge Soler go back-to-back. Braves take the lead, hang on for the lead, take a 3-1 lead. Let me panic it out Monday night, thinking that series is going back to Houston. Don't know how that's going to go. They're really good at home, especially in 2017. No twists in the knife there. But, yeah, super excited for the city of Atlanta and had a great time at Truist.
And then, of course, I should say Ryan is also a Houston Astros fan, so he has a different perspective on the way this went down. You want to chime in?
Overall, I was fine with it. You know, we got our championship out of the way, and I have nothing against the Braves. It was actually a good story. You know, it's the first time they've won one in a while since the the Jones, Maddox, Smoltz, Glavine era. So it was
95,
a good
right?
team, and 95 was their last one. They played in 99, but it's been a while. But they're a good team. You know, they've had their struggles this year. Acuna going out, all the injuries, the domestic violence, that situation didn't help. But yeah, it was a good team. They just got hot at the right time. You know, usually World Series champion is who gets hot, and the Braves were definitely the hot team, and they played better in the World Series. So hats off to them.
Yeah, it was great. I'm not a huge baseball fan because I'm a Reds fan, so I don't get to see much postseason baseball. So I lose interest late in the season. But to introduce our podcast to you, just so you know what we're all about, we talk about a lot of things in football, primarily college football, NFL football. We're the Hogmolly Hustle because we love the Hogmollies, offensive, defensive linemen, the guys that do all that hard work. So all the pretty guys, weird. So all the less Hogmolly guys can get all the attention there. So that's what we like to look at. But now let's look at some of the games. We'll recap last week in the NFL. There's a lot of big games here, a lot of big stories, and unfortunately some big injuries here. And I think that you two are both going to be hit by that. We'll talk about that in fantasy. But looking at some of these big games, you guys can chime in after I run through them and say which ones that you think were the most influential, mean the most. So the Saints beat the Bucs. The Patriots beat the Chargers. The Steelers beat the Browns, the Jets beat the Bengals, and the Packers beat the Cardinals. For me, the biggest and most influential game of those games has to be the Saints beating the Buccaneers. I've been saying all year long, Austin could back this up, I think the Bucs are very beatable. They have some of the same issues they had last year. They have pretty much the same team they had last year, so that makes sense. And they're not just going to blow everybody away. I said that first game against the Cowboys. This is what it's going to look like. They're going to have close games. And now they lose this game to the Saints. Not a terrible Saints team. And now the Saints are looking at some trades here now, or to pick up some other players to add to their roster. But the Bucs are very beatable. They're still capable of going deep in the playoffs. But losing to the Saints, it tells me that they can lose to just about anybody. Now they can beat just about anybody. But in the playoffs, I just don't think they're going to run through it like everybody was expecting early in the season. Austin?
Yeah, it's big. It keeps the Saints in relevant standing in the NFC South. Um, like you're saying, the Bucks are beatable. I don't think that they're, we've seen them against the Cowboys, against the Rams, and now against the Saints look vulnerable at times. Although they're super talented, they're, talking about the Hogmollys, they're really solid up front defensively and offensively on the line. They've got skilled position players that everything from, the speed at the wideout position. They've got red zone threats with Mike Evans and pretty solid tight end core. But the Saints just found a way to do it. Surprised me. That was at New Orleans, so the next time they play will be at Tampa. So that's something to keep your eye on. But, yeah, it's a huge win for New Orleans.
And it's important to note that Jameis Winston went down with a bad knee injury. He's out for the season, and they came in with their backup quarterback, not Taysom Hill, to handle most of that game. He did a pretty good job going through that game. But, I mean, it doesn't look great for the Saints as far as that goes. They have some issues at quarterback, but that's a big win, and it's a big loss for the Buccaneers. End of the game? What?
I don't put as much stock into it as far as the Bucks' perspective. I'm pretty sure they lost at New Orleans last year too, if I remember correctly. I mean, we're talking about going in New Orleans. That's a tough game, no matter what kind of team you're going up against. The Bucks have been super banged up in the secondary. I mean, I just think that's one of those games that, you lose, no big deal. They're still going to be there in the end. We knew they weren't going to just run through everybody. I don't think. They've had their issues last year. They got hot at the end, but with the injuries on defense, Antonio Brown was out, just to name one. He's a huge part of their offense. I don't really put much into it on the Bucs side. It was just a bad game for them.
You bring up a good point. They lost to the Saints twice last year, and once they got in the playoffs, of course, went the other way, and we all know how that ended up. That's a good point there. Any other games that have a lot of impact going forward?
The game that I was impressed with was actually the Patriots. I think they've looked really good lately, really solid. And, you got, 8 games into the season. Plenty of time for Belichick to kind of figure things out. Mac Jones looks like he's the best rookie quarterback so far, I think by far, no question. And just the way that they play defense, they're not going to have many turnovers. Damian Harris is running like crazy. And that, I don't know if it's more about the Patriots or that Chargers team, who everybody thought was, after about week 3 or 4, maybe the best team in the AFC, and they have just gone on a free fall since then. That's your boy Justin Herbert too.
Yeah. So to give some background here, I've been pretty vocal on our podcast about how good I think Justin Herbert and that Chargers team is. But I did say they were going to have a struggle against the Patriots. I've also spoke highly of the Patriots as well.
No, I think I definitely agree with the Schwab there. I think that's probably the biggest game of the week, especially because when you think about, I don't think that the Patriots are going to be winning that division with Buffalo in there, but they can absolutely try for a wild card, and I think that that's where the Chargers are going to be at. Potentially looking at a wild card, maybe the division if they turn things around, but. That's a big swing. If the Chargers win that game and the Patriots don't, then all of a sudden, Jared, our buddy that's a Patriots fan, is probably thinking, well, might not make the playoffs this year. Maybe we can regroup in the offseason and come back next year. So a lot of implications on the AFC playoff standings as well.
Yeah, and if you missed out, we were originally supposed to have you on last week when we had an NFC East deep dive, NFC East deep dive. We talked about the Patriots a lot in that, and it's a very interesting division. The Bills still probably win that, like Austin said, but the Patriots are very capable of coming back and making the playoffs and making a pretty solid run at that. I said that when they played the Buccaneers, and Mac Jones played a pretty good game in that situation. So it's a pretty big one. Now, it would be a big mistake not to mention, and we can't talk about all these games in detail that we want, but Mike White coming in the New York Jets, after Zach Wilson goes down, coming in and beating the Bengals, who were hotter than just about anybody at this point. We talked about the Bengals and whether they were for real or not, but that was a close game. Jamar Chase is playing out of his mind, and Joe Burrow is playing really well. But the Jets pull off the win, and Mike White's a legend. He's got his game ball and jersey in Canton already, which is pretty cool.
I didn't get a chance to watch this game, but I was just pulled up the box score just to see kind of how he did. I knew that obviously they won. We were listening to it on the radio on the way back from Atlanta. 37 of 45. That's pretty accurate coming off the bench and just slinging it. Did have 2 interceptions. You don't like to see that, but at the end of the day, throwing for 400 yards and having that kind of completion percentage looks good. The Jets don't have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, as evidenced with the way that we've seen Zach Wilson get clobbered in certain times this year. I've been impressed with Michael Carter. Being a Tar Heel football fan, I knew that Michael and Javonte had a lot of potential. I thought that New York would be a good spot for him, but it might take a year or two before we see him kind of blossom into the player that he could become. But the last couple of weeks, he's starting to, get more involved in that offense and averaging 5 yards per carry against the Bengals. That's what you like to see from a young guy.
Yeah, and I believe I read somewhere that Mike White passed up the former best debut game for a quarterback. Do you know who that was? Best debut passing game for a quarterback?
I'm guessing Cam versus the Cardinals.
Cam
Yep.
versus the Cardinals, I think.
Yep, Cam versus the Cardinals.
Shout out to Smitty. Ice up, son.
Yeah, so that was a big game, and then Mike White having this big game since then. So now his game ball and jersey also in Canton. So pretty cool there. And
One thing I'll say
then
about that one is that I thoroughly enjoyed it because in my survivor pool there was about 43% of the people on the Bengals, and I went the other way and went with the Chiefs. So I really enjoyed that about 2,000 people in my survivor pool lost out there.
nice. That is very fortunate. So the last two we have here, the Steelers and the Browns. Not a very impressive offensive showing from either side, but they grinded out like a Tomlin team should. Have some questions about the Browns going forward. The Packers beating the Cardinals in a pretty close game, closer than it probably should have been. In some cases, there were some questionable decisions going down the line, some play calls there. But it was a very close game. The Cardinals, another really, really hot team, loses the Packers. But now there's some question with the Packers. We'll get to that with the news a little bit later. So if you guys don't have anything to chime in about that, we'll go ahead and jump on to the news.
I would just say that I think that things are kind of coming apart at the seams for Cleveland. They've lost 3 of their last 4 now. And if you look at their, they gave up 47 points to the Chargers and 37 to the Cardinals. You've got the whole drama situation with Odell. They're thinking they might release him. It's just, you got Baker's shoulder injury. They're a team, again, talking about the trenches. They have one of the better defensive lines and offensive lines in the NFL. So it's just, it's got to be frustrating if you're a Cleveland fan.
Yeah, it's rough. Brian, do you have anything to add in?
Not really. I mean, for the Steelers side, it's just, they're just quietly plucking along there. They get their wins. It's not pretty, but they got a good defense, as we know. Najee Harris, I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit in fantasy maybe later, but he's been the rookie running back to have this year. Big Ben still, like I said, not pretty, but getting it done. They get their wins, so I'm sure they'll be right there for a wild card spot later in the year.
Yep, it's more. We'll talk more about the AFC North next week when we go into the AFC and NFC North deep dives. That'll wrap up our deep dive series here. Hey, tell your dog to be quiet. We have business to attend to here. All right.
Oh, I'm trying to get her to hush.
So the big news this week. There's a lot of big news ranging from somewhat deep to very, very deep. We'll start off with Henry, because I know both of you have a very big attachment to Henry because you both have Henry on your fantasy team. Derrick Henry goes down, and it looks like he's going to be out for pretty much the whole season with that foot injury. And I've said this plenty of times, this Titans team goes as far as Henry's health does. And with him being out, I know that Ryan, being a Texas A&M fan, is a huge fan of Tannehill, but I don't know if the Titans can win enough games here towards the end. Now, given that division is pretty bad right now, but it's going to be tough without Henry.
They're in the worst division in football, but, I mean, he's probably not even a quarterback, but probably the most valuable player this last maybe year and a half or so, just for what he means to that offense. They lead in just about every, rushing statistic as far as a percentage of plays run that are rushing plays, all that stuff. So they're going to try to replace his production with Adrian Peterson and Jeremy McNichols. Don't think that's going to really work out for him. But as long as they can just keep the defenses just honest in the slightest bit, just to get that play-action game running, because that's all Ryan Tannehill is. He's a play-action quarterback. A.J. Brown's the best play-action receiver in the league, so if they can weather the running game a little bit, they're still, I think, the favorites to win the division, just because, like you said, this is by far the worst division in football, and it's not even close, I don't think so. I still think they'll make the playoffs, but if Derrick Henry, and now if he's on the short side of that little injury timeline they gave us, he'll be back for not only the fantasy playoffs, which is what I care about, but he'll be back for the real playoffs too. So if he can come back and get healthy, then they're a scary team to think about late in the season, but they'll have to get there first.
Yeah, I was surprised that they took a flyer on Peterson. You have to replace that production somehow, and I have A.J. Brown in our keeper league, so I'm excited about the opportunity for him to get some more looks. Like you were talking about with play action, I'm hoping that their backs can at least keep that honest to keep that downfield threat still capable. Obviously, safeties get sucked in whenever Derrick Henry's running it down your throat 30, 40 times a game. So I'm just bummed as a football fan. It's so fun to just watch. I think they play Sunday night this week against the Rams, if I'm not mistaken. So, imagine watching that game where Henry gets the ball 30, 35 times, just bulldozing his way down the field. It's old school football. It's just fun to watch him be a bowling ball and just abuse the defense.
Yeah, we fawn over Derrick Henry in this podcast because he's just so doggone fun to watch. It's just the way he dominates games is unlike anything else in the NFL. It's crazy.
Dominates Madden games too, right?
Yeah, well, if to give you some background here, Austin, Schwab's in my division, and Derrick Henry just shoved it down my throat, and I couldn't stop it. 40 carries for 180 yards. He's tough in Madden, tougher in real life. Another one here. Texas A&M keeping a theme going here. Von Miller traded from the Broncos for a couple of high round draft picks to the Rams, who you just brought up. Now, there are some questions as to whether or not he is the Von Miller or if he is just a version of Von Miller at this point. And these questions will be answered once we actually see them in live action. But what do you guys think about this trade?
I think that he's still Von Miller. I think that, in comparing him to 2015 or 2016 Von Miller, obviously he's not the same explosive player after that knee injury, but I think that it's still a big boost to that defense. And, the game planning for Aaron Donald in the middle, Von Miller off the edge, and Ramsey in coverage, it really makes it tough. I think that he's going to – I don't think he'll be an every down player. I think that he's going to come in certain situations. But it would surprise me if this didn't come back up in the playoffs. I could envision Von Miller having a multi-sack game in a big spot, or at least drawing double teams and opening up other guys to make big plays on that defense.
Yeah, I think as long as he's healthy, he can still get after it. I think he had 4 sacks through his first 3 games or something like that this year. So he's still capable of getting to the passer. Just adding him to that defense that's already loaded up front, like Austin was saying, it has the potential to be very scary for anybody that comes across the Rams. The Rams are kind of going all in. I know we've seen the meme that they posted from Rounders where it actually didn't really make sense because he loses in the end. But they are definitely all in. We'll see if it pays off for them.
You got louder there. That was nice. But I think the lasting image in most people's minds, because not everybody watches the Broncos regularly, but the lasting image from Von Miller is the Super Bowl image of Von Miller dominating whoever they played in the Super Bowl it was that year. And
I remember who it was.
Who was it?
All right, we do not have to talk about that Super Bowl. This is a fun championship celebration week. This is not.
I had to talk about the World Series.
Yeah, everybody's getting blasted here. All right, so now it's time for me to get blasted. Next piece of news here. Looks like Aaron Rodgers is going to be out for maybe 2 weeks. They say he should be able to clear by next Saturday, but it looks like he's most certainly out this Saturday. And the big discussion topic everybody's talking about is saying, oh, Aaron Rodgers lied. They asked if he'd been vaccinated, and he said that he had been vaccinated. When the quote was, have you been vaccinated? He says, yes, I've been immunized, which isn't really answering the question. It's sort of a half answer, but it's also saying something more along the lines of vague answer of, I've had it, so now I'm immune to it. So whether he lied or not, I don't really know the answer to that. But as far as football goes, the Packers without Aaron Rodgers, not great. And I don't really like the idea of Jordan Love starting this game when the discussion, when they brought in Blake Bortles to go to their practice squad, they're flying him in to go through that process, and they say there's a chance he could start. If there's a chance Blake Bortles can start over Jordan Love in this situation, not really liking that outlook for the Packers.
So I'm confused. They drafted Jordan Love, 2 years ago?
Yep.
Right? Pretty high draft pick, and he's not ready for the situation. What's going on there? Is he hurt or something? From all the things I've kept up with, he doesn't seem to be hurt. They didn't play him really any last year. When they had the backup come in, it wasn't him. They kept him out of there, and presumably just making sure he doesn't get exposed in that situation. Like with Blake Bortles, you know what you're getting, and it's not great. With
Former
Jordan
AFC
Love,
Championship quarterback.
Okay, and what role did he play with that team? Was he a gunslinging MVP caliber quarterback, or was he a game manager that rode the coattails of the defense and a good running game?
He was Blake the Immortal Bortles, man.
Okay.
What are you talking about?
Okay. Teenage Mutant Ninja Bortles.
Yeah, look at that. You have anything to add there?
Not really. I mean, just like you were saying, we'll see. I mean, I expect Rodgers to be back next week, so I think the bigger thing is getting Devontae Adams back.
Yeah, and it's, of course, a big, big game for both teams involved here. This is one we talked about a few weeks ago, saying this could have been a dagger game for the Chiefs if they were to lose and go on a little bit more of a skid here. They had a pretty tough game this past week against a team they shouldn't have really had a tough game with. I have said in the past couple episodes that the Chiefs need to hit the panic button because there are some issues going forward. Now, once they get in the playoffs, it's a different story, but there are obviously some issues. But now with the Packers not going to have their starting quarterback, the chances that they win this game looking pretty bad. So it's a good outcome for the Chiefs, but if the Chiefs lose this game, that's really, really bad if you're a Chiefs fan. All right.
Well, the Chiefs
The
barely
last-
skated by the Giants, and you saw Mahomes' wife's reaction, right?
I did not.
It's go watch the video. I can't really explain it. It's kind of cringy.
Okay. Did Mahomes' brother dance before this game too?
I'm sure he probably did. Yeah, he's always doing some kind of stupid TikTok.
Has there ever been a more universally hated player sibling than Jackson?
As a Hornets fan, I think the Ball family might be in that neighborhood, but I don't know.
I'll take LeVar all day.
Did you, not to get too off topic, but did you see LeVar Ball's recent quote? Years ago, he said that he could beat Michael Jordan in one-on-one. And then somebody had asked about it, I think in like a podcast or in some kind of YouTube video. And he's like, yeah, I'll beat him. He's like, back in that time, he's like, he's 6'6", 220. He's like, I was about the same. I was benching 500. He's like, I got him all day. He's on wraps. He's like, all day, one-on-one. I got him. So, I mean, I don't know. I just wish that Sam Darnold had that kind of confidence.
I just wish LeVar Ball would TikTok dance before Hornets games.
We can make it happen.
It'd be great. It'd be viral. So, not to kill the vibe here, but the last story we have to go over here is the Henry Ruggs situation. And this is just a real tragedy. The story is, and if I miss anything, you can correct me here, but apparently, very late, like over past 2 a.m., 3 a.m., he's very, very intoxicated, has a loaded gun in the back of his car, speeding, hitting at upwards of 120, 150 miles an hour, ends up hitting another car, which happens to have a woman in the car, around 22 years old, same age as Ruggs, and her dog. And after the impact, they both end up perishing in this accident. And now Ruggs is in custody. His career is up in the air. There were lives lost in this. People are speaking on both sides of the situation here, but I think everybody agrees it's a tragedy. And it's just a heartbreaking situation. And it gets me choked up a little bit every time I talk about it, because I just think about just how quickly things can happen there. And it's a very sensitive subject, and my prayers go out to all those that are involved, and it's a very tough situation.
I think that anytime something like this happens, it's just rough. I think back to when Boeheim, the head coach at Syracuse, accidentally hit somebody, I think, that was walking alongside the highway after a Syracuse game. This is a little different, though. This is something where, Henry Ruggs made some dumb decisions. Mixing alcohol and driving is a dumb decision. According to sources on Twitter, he was going 156 miles per hour seconds before the crash, and 127 when the airbags deployed. It's just senseless. I mean, to see someone so young and so talented in that spot to where he could set himself up for life, set his family up for life, have a great NFL career. I mean, I thought that he was one of the best receivers coming out of last year's draft class. It's crazy how quickly things can materialize and just completely change someone's life, especially if you're a professional athlete.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Just terrible situation. Feel bad for everybody involved. I mean, we can call Henry Ruggs stupid, but I mean, we've all kind of been there. We do stupid stuff that we shouldn't have been doing. Now, he just got highly unlucky that something happened, but it just goes back to all these. You hear that all these NFL players they have unlimited resources that they can help themselves and get out of those situations. So, just sucks that he chose to do that, and just a shitty situation. So, not much else to say about it.
And there are discussions being had on both sides. Derek Carr spoke out recently saying that, at the beginning of the press conference, said that he his prayers go out to those that lost someone in their family, a daughter, a sister, and his prayers go out. But he also says that he has to pray for Henry Ruggs as well. He has to be there for him. He felt like he had a little bit of remorse because he couldn't have done anything proactively to help avoid this or change this. And he's really getting blasted on Twitter a lot. I know Twitter's not real life, and I don't really put too much stock in Twitter personally, but it does bother me to see such an attack on Derek Carr. He's not discrediting the loss of life, but he is trying to be as humane as he can be to someone that was his brother in arms going forward, but also tiptoeing around a delicate subject.
Yeah.
So I'm not a huge fan of seeing that happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't put too much stock into the Twitter stuff. That's just the bots and the trolls.
Yeah. But hopefully this thing gets figured out. It's been just a whole bunch of bad things happening.
Not been a good year for the Vegas Raiders.
It has not been a very good year for the Raiders. And hopefully, whether it be some sort of foundation or some sort of good, hopefully something good comes out of this. That's my only hope, that in some way that family can have some sort of reconciliation, some sort of something good come out of this, because it's a very, very tough situation to lose somebody very close in a tragedy like that. But let's not linger on this for too much longer. Let's move on to some fantasy here. With our resident fantasy expert, we have some questions. So first, let's start off with some advice. I have a pretty big week here. I have two quarterbacks that were my starting quarterbacks, and Russell Wilson and Trey Lance both went down. All right, so that's not good. Russell Wilson's been throwing a little bit, but we don't know when he's going to come back. So I ended up trading for Ben Roethlisberger and Jimmy Garoppolo. They're not the best options here, but I have a pretty big week this week. It is a pretty big game for me in my fantasy season, and I really need to win this. So who should I start there?
Who did you say again?
Ben Roethlisberger and Jimmy Garoppolo.
No, both of them kind of have a similar matchup in the Arizona Cardinals and Chicago Bears. I don't think there's really a matchup advantage here. Honestly, I think I would go with Big Ben. He's at home in prime time. I think the Bears do have a decent run defense, so they might be able to plug Najee Harris a little bit. But Big Ben is going to throw the ball. Now, he's not going to throw it very deep, but he's going to throw the ball a lot. I think probably, upwards to 25, 30 times. He'll dump it off to Najee a bunch. He'll dump it off to Deontay, all those guys. But I just think that 49ers-Cardinals game is going to be ugly with all the people that are potentially out for Arizona. Kyler may not play. Hopkins is banged up. I think that's one of the I'm looking at maybe 13-10, something like that. I think Steelers have a much better chance of putting up more points. I would personally go with Big Ben in that situation.
Okay. That's the way I was leaning, and I was fortunate enough to have drafted both Jamar Chase and Najee Harris in our rookie draft. So,
quick question: Is Taysom Hill available?
No, he's not.
Okay.
See, because we're in a dynasty league and we have extra COVID spots now, there's pretty much no one to pick up in free agency. To give you an example, my third quarterback option is Blake Bortles. So
the top quarterbacks on the market right now are Trevor Siemian, Marcus Mariota, and PJ Walker.
Hey, PJ, though, getting the start, isn't he?
I don't know. Sam was at practice. He's still limited. Not only does he have a concussion, or he's in concussion protocol, but he also has a shoulder injury. So I would think that PJ would probably get to start, but the fact that Darnold's even practicing surprised me.
Yeah, your only hope with PJ is that he breaks off a run or something.
Yeah, I did think about that because of the running threat that PJ has. Something. You have any advice that you're seeking out from our fantasy expert, Austin?
Yeah, I've had one of those seasons where everything falls apart from the beginning.
Nice, nice.
In our keeper league. So I think I'm currently fourth in total points, but I'm sitting in ninth place at 2-6. Technically, the last four teams in the standings are all 2-6, and so the eight seed in the standings is 4-4. So I'm thinking that I'm going to be tanking, and trying to trade Devontae Adams and Brandon Cooks on one-year deals for picks in our rookie draft. So I'm kind of wondering, is there anybody in the college scene right now that would be in the 2022 draft that you think should be worth targeting, specifically quarterbacks and running backs?
That is definitely a Caleb question. He is the college guy. I used to be a big college football guy, but now if it's not an SEC question or specifically A&M, I'm not much help with the prospects. Well, just for example, me and Caleb will talk on Xbox, and he'll mention all these names like, who is that? And it's like a top 10 projected guy. I was like, I have no idea who that is. But I will say that I am a homer, but depending on the situation that Isaiah Spiller goes to, I mean, he's one of those top running backs that'll be coming out. He might be someone to look for if he goes to a good situation. I mean, other than that, I'm not big on the college names. That would be more of a Caleb question, like I said.
Chris Olave, pretty good wide receiver. Had a couple big injuries here this recently in college football to some big name receivers. But no, you know how bad your fantasy season's going when you're trading the best receiver in football for a pick. So that's just how it goes.
Do y'all have a last place punishment in your league?
Not that I know of. We should.
So you don't have to worry about that. Yeah, we have ours for a while was we do for our draft we need a lot of beer to be able to settle our draft order. And so the loser had to go to the store and address and buy the beer. That was the punishment. Well, this year we've added the Waffle House option, which I'm sure you've seen it. But the Waffle House option is that you have to spend 24 hours in a Waffle House. Each waffle you eat takes away 1 hour. So, for example, you eat 12 waffles, then you can leave after 12 hours. So we're adding that as a potential option this year for the last place finish.
I would do that.
I'd have 24 in no time.
I don't know, man. Those waffles are tough.
I'd be out in like 5 or 6 hours.
Those are tough to put down. They start piling up there.
All right, that's definitely something we need to look at there. Now, unfortunately, we have a good chunk of our fantasy league being old people, so I don't think they'd be up for a punishment like that. So we'll have to see there. But you've never done a Dynasty League, have you?
No, I like the we've talked about, I've been in the same league now this is our 11th season with all my friends, and we've talked about, maybe making it a keeper league, stuff like that, but I really just enjoy the pure redraft, just that you can go into the season having a chance at everybody. In a keeper league, not as much because you only keep a few guys, but definitely Dynasty League, you're going to pay for your mistakes for a long time, and I like hitting the reset button every year, giving everybody an equal chance going into the season. So I like that way.
Now, I like the Dynasty way of stuff. I've done both, and the redraft stuff is cool. But if you strike out, it's pretty tough to recover if you just end up with a bad draft and things start going poorly. In a Dynasty League, you can at least punt and say, hey, I can at least build towards next year, like Austin talked about. Now, this year we're having some other issues that aren't typically normal just because we have some extra COVID spots, so our rosters are huge, comparatively speaking. Once that shrinks back down, it gets a little bit better. But I just like the idea of being able to plan ahead. Like you say, I'm a big prospect guy, so I like being able to say, all right, cool, I'm watching this guy. I can't wait to add this guy to my roster in the rookie draft and all these things. It's got a lot of cool elements to it, and there are apparently like thousands of different ways to play fantasy football. I didn't realize that, but there's like king of the league fantasy leagues. You ever heard of those? Or true dynasty leagues?
No.
So apparently, like there's leagues out there that if you have somebody win 3 times in a row, the league ends, and then you start over. It's a dynasty league, but if somebody wins 3 times in a row, they create their dynasty, and then the league's over, and you have their king or whatever. There's plenty of different ways to get really outside of the box for fantasy, but I just like the basic dynasty league. It's what works for me. I can be hands off in a lot of cases. It's not as crazy week to week as some of the regular fantasy stuff. But another question I have here. So you keep up with some fantasy rankings, and normally when the podcast you had was in normal settings, you would have your fantasy rankings. But have you kept track of who the fantasy standouts are this year?
I mean, yeah, but it's pretty general. What do you want me to?
Has anybody been
standouts?
Has anybody been surprising?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're talking about surprising, the first name you got to go to is Cordarrelle Patterson. I mean, he had the big couple first weeks, but every week you kept saying, all right, well, there's no way this can last. He's scoring touchdowns on, single-digit touches, and he's just kept going. He scores a touchdown about every week. He's heavily involved in the passing game, also getting a ton of carries. Now with Calvin Ridley being gone for the foreseeable future, he is definitely, I think, him and Kyle Pitts are the 2 focal points of that offense. And the Falcons are bad, but they're going to be down. They're going to be throwing the ball. And so I think he has a chance to remain, I don't know if he's going to finish, top 10, but he definitely has a chance to remain up there in that running back 2, wide receiver 2, whatever your league has him classified as, and be productive the whole season, which is not something that anybody would have expected. Certainly
not. I would agree with that. I was doing some Cordarrelle Patterson bashing at the beginning of the season myself, and I like how you cover your mic and it doesn't block anything from being said.
Oh, my bad. I thought it did. I had it muted, though.
I do appreciate you have a light on this time, so you're not just fading into the darkness.
My dog will not leave me alone. She wants to go outside. So,
you have any other question for?
We'll do another surprising standout, I think, of the receivers. Now, in the last 2 years, we've seen this change, but typically it's been tough for a rookie wide receiver to come in and have a huge fantasy impact. I did a deep dive a few years ago, and I analyzed all the top running back, wide receiver, QB draft picks just to see who hit more from a fantasy standpoint. And wide receiver was definitely the furthest down the list. I don't know if it's just adjusting to the pro game, learning all the new play, stuff like that. But last year we saw Justin Jefferson have a huge rookie year. And now this year Jamar Chase has come in after taking a year off from football, but has the connection with Joe Burrow. And he's probably, the number 2, number 3 receiver in your league, depending on how your points work out. And especially going into the year, we heard all the drop issues. I just don't know if that was something that everybody expected. A lot of people to feed in that Bengals offense too, but he's definitely been the standout.
Yeah, the Justin Jefferson stuff or the Jamar Chase stuff really surprised me because in the offseason, the preseason, people were saying, oh, he's dropping all these things. But you look at what Justin Jefferson did when he came into the NFL, and you look at what he did when he was in college. And then if you look at Jamar Chase, who was a better receiver than Justin Jefferson in college, a better receiver than Justin Jefferson now, why would he not have the same success when he has this connection to Joe Burrow? So I thought when the drops were just kind of like the same issue with Penei Sewell in the preseason, where he was looking pretty rusty in the preseason, but he also took a year off, and he had his own problems. But then as the season went on, you started saying, oh, okay, both these guys are really good, and it makes a lot more sense that they took him in the top 5. So I think he answered a lot of questions there. It didn't really seem to me like it was much of a mystery what was going to happen there. But I am loving me some Jamar Chase because he has been winning me some games this season. All right, I'll take that silence as it's time to move on to the next part. So we're getting a little bit later into the season. We're not quite to playoff season yet, but we are getting towards those nitty-gritty games where you got to win. You can't be dropping games at this point. If you had to pick a couple of guys that you should have on your roster heading into the end of the season, favorable schedules, however you want to look at it, who can we depend on?
Well, something I always like to do is look at the playoff strength of schedule, and I'm talking about fantasy playoffs. So depending on now, we did 14 regular season weeks this year because they added we're playing 18 weeks in the NFL this year. We're not going to play the last week because if you play the last week, then I just don't know what to tell you. You're chancing it that your guy might sit out due to playoff positioning, as people do. But this year they made it difficult because the bye weeks actually went through week 14. And so if you have, like, I think it's the Eagles, the Panthers, those teams have a bye week 14. Maybe it's not the Panthers. For sure the Eagles, though. And so there's some fantasy players that would be affected. And so we're playing weeks 15, 16, 17 for our fantasy playoffs. But one thing I like to look at is your playoff strength of schedule. And so, for example, last year, David Montgomery had the number 1 playoff strength of schedule. Now, David Montgomery was kind of solid all year, but if you remember the end of last year, he won people fantasy championships because, I mean, he was literally scoring 25 points a game in those playoff games. So this year, a couple of guys that have really favorable playoff schedules. The Browns have a good running game schedule, so Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, if he comes back, Nick Chubb get back on track, maybe win you fantasy matchups. Another one is the Jaguars have a really good end of the year stretch. They play the Texans, which you know because we just played that game on Madden. But they have some easy games, so if James Robinson can come back, I know he's a little banged up right now. And then as far as like a receiver standpoint, the Cowboys have a really favorable end of the year schedule passing wise, so CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, players like that. But as far as like top guys having bad fantasy playoff schedules, I don't put as much stock into that because, I mean, there's just certain guys where you're not worried about their matchups. So I look for the favorable playoff matchups because I can boost those like mid-range players, but I don't worry as much about the top players.
Okay. So you're saying I should depend on Blake Bortles around week 14, 15, 16?
Yeah, I mean, that'd probably be a good advice there. I think you should definitely do that.
Okay, we'll do. I'm dropping Trey Lance and Russell Wilson right now. Well, that's all the fantasy questions that I have. Do you have any to throw in there, Austin?
Just one more. We kind of looked at the Titans running back situation, trying to supplement the loss of Derrick Henry and what they can do there. I'm kind of wondering, is there anybody on that team, running back wise, or maybe someone else that might be a free agent right now in most leagues that you think would be worth taking a waiver on?
So, as we talked about, I have Derrick Henry. Now, I'm first in my league, most points scored, so I'm just going to try to weather the storm and pray that Derrick Henry comes back about week 15 for my playoffs. But I was prepared at the time to put the rest of my fab. We do some free agent auction bidding. I was going to put the rest of that on Jeremy McNichols because he is the receiving back, but as the only option, he was definitely going to get some carries. But once they signed Adrian Peterson, I don't know if either one of them is going to be a viable fantasy option. Adrian Peterson, you're just hoping scores a couple, 1 or 2 yard touchdowns. But I wouldn't trust either one of those guys the rest of the way. They're going to be looking, I think, to throw the ball a little bit more. As far as free agents that might be available, I don't know, the quality of who would be there in your league, but if it's anything like ours, it's pretty thin, and there's not this point of the season. We're in week 9, there's not much left out there. So.
Right. Yeah,
I think
the top back in our league, Caleb. Do you want to take a stab at who that is? Free agent back.
Is it Trent Richardson? Trent Richardson.
It's Kyle Juszczyk, who's a fullback. So.
Yeah, it's rough. To give you an idea of how big our rosters are right now because of the COVID spots we have, I have 3 team defenses on my roster and about 7 defensive players.
Now, I will say that going back to the Titans, they did sign Deontay Foreman, and I think if he were to actually be given the opportunity, I like his chances a lot more than Adrian Peterson to be valuable. And I see Caleb smiling because he knows he puts the team on his back in Madden. So, but he's a guy that had a great career at Texas.
He's still pretty young, right?
Still pretty young. Texans cut him along with 40 other guys because he probably had attitude problems or something like that. But he can also catch the ball to the backfield a little bit. So if I think he were to be given that full opportunity, I think out of those 3 guys, he would have the best chance to be a successful fantasy back. But who knows at this point if they're going to give him that opportunity.
Yep. And I believe Austin also has a lot of points scored in our fantasy league, probably because common denominator there, you got Derrick Henry. Was that the right math term? I wasn't sure if I had the right math term.
My team is like 80% Josh Allen, Derrick Henry, and Devontae Adams. Like I got A.J. Brown, Kyle Pitts, Brandon Cooks, but that's my bread and butter right there. So,
all right. So
good news with Brandon Cooks with Tyrod Taylor coming back because they had a really good connection those first 2 weeks.
yeah, and I'd actually scooped up Tyrod to replace Josh Allen in his bye week, and he got hurt that week. So I've got Juju out, I've got Gus Edwards out, Derrick Henry out. Not one to write home about, that's for sure. Long year.
So, Schwab, did you hear about the math teacher that was afraid of negative numbers?
I haven't heard this one, so no.
He would stop at nothing to avoid them. All right, so the next part in our podcast we like to move on to is our big boy shout-outs. Of course, we love offensive, defensive linemen. And for various different reasons, could be player of the week, could be just a big play in a big game. College, NFL, we like to shout out the guys that don't really get the attention they deserve. My two shout-outs, we got one offense and one defense. John Runyon, a guard for the Green Bay Packers. They had some pretty close possessions. That game could have gone either way towards the end, and they had a pretty crucial third down conversion and also another third down conversion after this point. But the one I'm talking about is when A.J. Dillon's making a hard run. He's plowing through some defenders there, but he kind of gets stood up for a second there, and it looks like he might not make it past the first down marker. But John Runyon comes in and does what an offensive lineman should and helps his running back get across the line, makes the big play. Huge play in that, huge conversion, and that really helps the Packers in that game, that very close game. So it's just a little play, but it's just something you like to see from the offensive linemen helping their guys in. Also, Yannick Ngakoue, and he kind of counts as a Hogmolly. He's in the defensive line brotherhood, but I think he weighs less than me, so we'll see if he counts. But Yannick Ngakoue, Defensive Player of the Week, had a couple of sacks, had a lot of pressures in their game this past week. One of the bright and shining stars for the Raiders this year. He and Max Crosby playing really well. He bounced around last year. He's on a few different teams. He ended up getting 7 or 8 sacks last year. And I'm really hoping Yannick Ngakoue can get a bounce back for his career. He's still pretty young, 26 or 27. And he has some good arm. He has some good hand combat skills. I like to see Yannick Ngakoue get a bounce back, and he's already got about half of his sacks he had last year. So we'll see what happens going forward. But those are my big boy shout-outs. On to you, Austin.
All right. I'm going to the college landscape, specifically Louisiana Lafayette, a team that, Caleb being an App State guy, been kind of a thorn in the side of App State this year. They've got a really good season going, and largely in part of because of their tackles, specifically Max Mitchell. He's currently, they have 2 ranked in the top 10 in PFF's offensive tackle grades. Max Mitchell's first, and Ken Marks is 6th. So I'm going to talk about Max Mitchell a little bit. 6'6", 270 pounds. He's got the prototypical frame of an offensive tackle, wide chest, long arms, wide base, great stance, and his value in the run game for the Raging Cajuns has just been so big for them. I think they beat Texas State 45-0 this week. They were dominant against a pretty decent front seven at App State, and my dog will not leave me alone, guys. I'm sorry.
She doesn't like the Raging Cajuns. I don't blame her.
Arya, come. She wants to go out. So anyways, he's been instrumental in that run game, and I think he's a guy that could be a sneaky good pickup in the draft this year. Somebody that might go in the 4th or 5th round and end up being an NFL starter. And then on the defensive side of the ball, David Ojabo. This is a guy that was born in Nigeria. He grew up in Aberdeen, Scotland. His family moved there when he was 7. Aria, hey, come here.
If you need to take her out, we can carry on with.
So he's a defensive end for Michigan. David Ojabo, 6'5", 250. Reminds me a little bit of Brian Burns in a way, just with how athletic he is, his hands off the edge. He's really good at getting off of blocks with rip moves and swims. He's got 7 sacks on the season. I know they lost to Michigan State this. She wants to play. I know they lost to Michigan State this week, but he had 2 sacks in that game and 4 tackles and was really instrumental in that defense, kind of keeping it close. So he's another guy, again, opposite of Aiden Hutchinson, a guy that's got a first-round grade for next year's draft. That Michigan's defense is a big part of why they have been as good as they have been this year. So, yeah, big shout-out to him.
All right. That's our big boy shout-outs for this week. Again, if you're still watching or if you tuned in just now, make sure you like and subscribe and leave a comment if you agree with or disagree with anything we say. We're big boys. We can take it. Now, Schwab, you can get back in here when we're going to talk about the upcoming week. We have some big games in the NFL and big games in college football and some big news for college football as the new rankings have just come out. Now, you may not know this, but I'm huge on Georgia. I've been huge on Georgia this whole season. And they are, of course, at the top. Some believed it was a little bit surprising that Alabama was at 2, and I believe Michigan State was at 3,
Yep.
And Ohio State was at 4. Is that correct?
They had Oregon at 4.
For Oregon at 4, that's right, and Ohio State at 5. That's what it was. So what do you guys think about that? You're both big college football fans.
The one thing I'll say is that they've proven that a group of 5 team is never going to be able to make this 4-team playoff. If Cincinnati is not going to make the top 4 after the beginning of the year, with them being undefeated and the struggles we've seen at the top this year from some of the normal top teams, then they're going to have no choice than they have to join a Power 5 conference if they ever want to be in the talks here. I don't even know if they went to 8 teams like they've been talking about expanding, if that would even work, because then you'd have the Power 5 automatic qualifiers, and it'd still just be the top 3, wild card teams, or however you want to put it. So I think this is just proving that Cincinnati is going to have to join a big boy conference just any group of 5 team really, if they want to be able to make the college football playoff.
I would completely agree with that. Which I think that is it Cincy trying to join the Big 12? I think that's what. Yeah.
They've extended, the invites to U of H and SMU, maybe. U of H for sure has accepted their invite, but the other 2 rumored ones were, Cincinnati and I think BYU.
So yeah,
I think Cincinnati's going to have to pull the trigger there.
I mean, looking at Cincinnati's schedule, I know that they played at Notre Dame, which, if you're anybody who's familiar with college athletics, that game was probably scheduled years in advance. So at the time they scheduled that game thinking, okay, we'll play a road game at Notre Dame, a school that, is regularly a top 10, top 15 school. Obviously this year for the Irish hasn't been quite as good as years past, but they're still 7-1. That's a big road win. If you're a school like Cincinnati, I don't know why you wouldn't just make your non-con games against the biggest and baddest that you can possibly get scheduled. Because if you lose those games, it's not a big deal. You were expected to lose, and they won't really count against you as easily as they will count for you if you win them. And it's like you said, it's really, it's almost impossible to get in otherwise. If they had another win against, say, an Oklahoma or a Michigan, then it would be possible. But because their conference play is a little weak in comparison to the SEC and the Big Ten and the Big 12, it's it stinks. I mean, they're undefeated and they're on the outside looking in. It's not like Oregon's loss to Stanford is, it's not like Stanford is a team that set the world on fire this year. They're 3-5 in the Pac-12, so it stinks for Cincinnati.
Yeah, and another one is Oklahoma's pretty high up there, and they have some of the same common opponents that Cincinnati has had. And it's weird to see a team drop out of the top 4 after not losing a game but having close games. And like you say, it proves that point. But then you talk about some of the close games they had against Toledo, but also Oklahoma had close games against Toledo that they moved up. So there's a lot of questions to be had here. People were questioning why Alabama's at 2 with their loss. They said, well, they lost to an unranked team. I think, well, that unranked Texas A&M team is now ranked 13. So I think that they should have been ranked when they lost to Alabama in the first place, at least towards the end. But there are a lot of questions. The rankings are always a big point of contention for arguments in the sporting world. But whoever's 4th place, there's a very likely chance that they're going to get slaughtered by whoever's in first place there. So I don't know if it's a huge deal who's there at 4th place, because right now, the people they have going in there, I don't think they're going to stand much of a chance against Georgia or heaven forbid Alabama if they somehow take it.
Do you guys think that Michigan State and Oregon stand a chance at staying in there? Or do you think that like Ohio State, Cincinnati, Michigan, Oklahoma are going to leapfrog them?
I think Auburn's an interesting team to watch, not necessarily to find themselves in the top 4, but to play spoiler for a couple of teams. Now, if Auburn in the Iron Bowl this year against Alabama, if they can beat Alabama, it would be one of the most momentous games in Iron Bowl history. And there's a good chance they could. They got a pretty good team here. But then again, we have talked about the difference in the good and great teams in the SEC. We saw Kentucky get obliterated by Georgia. We've seen Florida, who was a good SEC team, or decent SEC team, get obliterated by Georgia. So there is a difference between that upper echelon of SEC teams, and Schwab can definitely talk about that.
Yeah, if you're talking about Auburn, I think that is a team that controls their own destiny. They have Texas A&M. We're number 14, so that'd be a big win for them. Then they have Mississippi State the next week, which is currently number 17. Then they would finish against number 2 Alabama. So if they could go 4-0 to end the season and then just put up any sort of fight against Georgia in the SEC championship game. Now, granted, that would be an Auburn team that now has 3 losses. So I don't know if they could still sneak in there without winning against Georgia in the SEC championship game, but definitely a team to watch out for.
If they run the table, though, and beat A&M on the road, beat Bama at Jordan-Hare Stadium, and then Georgia in the SEC title game, there's a situation where they could see themselves sneak in, even with 2 losses.
If they run the table, you have to put them in. They'd be the hottest team in the country.
Yep.
And in those
the
last
2
5
biggest
weeks of the
wins.
season, beat 4 ranked teams, including 2-1. Like, you'd have to put them in.
Wishful thinking,
I've been very
but
vocal.
it's possible.
I've been very vocal about my opposition to Ohio State making it in this year. I called them as done pretty early in the season. I didn't like what I was seeing. They are improving a little bit this year, but I still don't think they need to be in there. They kind of dropped off a little bit this year. They'll be better next year, but they haven't dropped off as hard as Clemson has.
We'll find out what they're made of. They've got games against Purdue, Michigan State, and Michigan to end their season. So,
yeah, it's a big finish here. Now, Oregon's the one that I think most people that don't keep up with college football very closely, and some, even those that keep up with college football closely, are scratching their heads about, because Oregon is a team that many feel doesn't need to be in the Final Four. So, what do you guys think about Oregon?
big road win at Ohio State earlier in the season is, I mean, we knew that one way or another that would come back to bite somebody. I think that, you know, if they win the rest of their games, looking at their schedule, they've got at Washington, game against Washington State, at Utah, and Oregon State. None of those are really cream of the crop of the Pac-12 right now. Utah, I believe, is who they would probably play in the Pac-12 championship game. They're 5-3 right now. I don't know if Utah's defense could stop Oregon's offense. So I think there's a situation where Oregon gets in as the 4 seed and then they just get slaughtered by Georgia. Probably what I would assume would happen there.
I don't really have anything to add for Auburn, or not Auburn, Oregon. I haven't really paid much attention, like I said, outside of A&M and the SEC, but I do know that the history of Pac-12 teams in the college football playoff has not been kind. So just leave it at that.
So now we'll move on. We got about 5 minutes, a little bit more here. We got some big games this week. Some, unfortunately, not going to be as big as they would have been normally. We got Cleveland, Cincinnati. We got San Francisco, Arizona, Tennessee, and Los Angeles, and then Green Bay and Kansas City. A couple of those games are deflated a little bit after some injuries and some other situations going down in those teams. But I guess all 4 of those teams are pretty banged up at this point, but those are some of the biggest games with the biggest ramifications this week.
Yeah, the one that stands out to me that I'm looking forward to the most has to be Titans-Rams, just because I'm interested to see, we talked about a lot already, but what the Titans look like with no Derrick Henry. And the Rams are just a fun team to watch. And, I mean, the Titans, even without Derrick Henry, they should still be a fun team to watch. Tannehill's going to have some deep throws. So I expect that to be the most exciting game out of the bunch. I think I already mentioned that I expect Niners-Cardinals to be a snooze fest. And then Packers without Aaron Rodgers, that would have been a huge matchup versus Mahomes. But, yeah, the Rams-Titans definitely the one I'm looking forward to the most.
It's time to bring back Matt Flynn. I lost a fantasy league one year because of Matt Flynn. But Cleveland-Cincinnati is a big one. That has a big ramification. If the Cleveland Browns lose the Bengals at this point, it really just keeps this skid going. Who knows what's going to happen for the Browns? Like Austin said, they seem to be falling apart at the seams.
Yeah, I think that's the one that I'm circling. I'll be interested to see if the Bengals can continue to prove that they're better than what we expected them to be, or if they fall flat on their face. So we know that Baker's not 100%. They're pretty banged up right now. You've got the drama with Odell going on. Another thing that I'm kind of curious to see this week, and again, this largely falls on the quarterback matchup, depending on who's healthy. But Patriots-Panthers are 2 teams that are sitting at 500, and both are hoping to be able to fight for wild card position. So big game for both of those 2 teams to try to get the ball rolling and get back on the right track. If New England wins this game, I think it sets them up really well for an AFC playoff spot. And if Darnold's not healthy, then it's a great opportunity for them to really establish themselves. They still have 2 games against the Bills left. They've got the Jaguars and Dolphins. So, I think it's a good opportunity for the Patriots there.
So is it better or worse for the Panthers that Sam Darnold's not in there? As we remember, Sam Darnold has a habit of seeing ghosts when playing the Patriots. So is it better to have P.J. Walker or Sam Darnold out there?
I think it depends on the day. I mean, I'll be the first to tell you our offensive line has been horrible this year. At times you see like just a standard D tackle and 2 D ends, just like a 3-man rush, get to the quarterback in under 4 or 5 seconds. It's just absurd that a simple cross from the 2 linemen can confuse an offensive line so much to the point where Darnold gets drilled into the ground, and then the rest of the game he's just walking with his head on a swivel. He can't get comfortable. He doesn't plant his feet. He's scared to read through his progressions and let things develop. So,
well, I do pick at Sam Darnold. I pick on Sam Darnold a lot, but he has improved each week, and you see him in some cases get a little bit more settled in the pocket, but then, of course, as you say, it breaks down, and then he goes back to his old ways of just kind of freaking out. He's not getting much help from guys like Anderson. There's a lot of drops. There's a lot of times where he's hitting guys right on the money, right on time, and it's just not working out for him. Patriots, this could be a big win for them, a big win for the Panthers as well. So that's definitely a good game to look at. And I think that's it. If you like what you heard, if you were sticking around, you just tuned in, make sure you like and subscribe. We'll be back next week to talk about some more stuff. We got our deep dive for the Northern Divisions, wrapping up our deep dive series. Special thanks to Ryan the Schwab for coming in here, our resident fantasy expert, former host of the Fantasy and Chill podcast. It's been a good time having you on here. Hopefully we can have you back on closer to playoff time and talk about some developments in our fantasy leagues. Again, thank you for tuning in to the Hogmolly Hustle. We'll be back next week. Thank you all for watching. Have a beautiful day.